I'm Chaplain Scott of the Oregon National Guard. This is the Hope in the Trenches podcast. Where going forward, I'll sit down for conversations with people who offer interesting and informative perspectives on finding strength for life and work in the trenches, and even improving our spiritual posture. Whether you feel like you're under heavy bombardment or ready to go over the top toward a new objective, it's good to be with you. Our guest today is Brigadier General Alan Gronewold, the 32nd Adjutant General, or TAG, for the Oregon National Guard. TAG is responsible for providing the state of Oregon and the United States with a ready force of more than 8,100 citizen soldiers and airmen, equipped and trained to respond to any contingency, natural or man-made. He develops and coordinates all policies, plans, and programs for the Oregon National Guard in concert with the governor and state legislature. General Gronewold received his commission from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1996. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from the Military Academy and a Master's in Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College. He's qualified to fly the UH-60 Blackhawk, CH-47 Chinook, and our fixed-wing C-12. He began his military career on active duty, serving with the 2nd Infantry Division in Korea, the 2nd Cav Regiment at Fort Johnson, Louisiana, and then with the 12th Aviation Brigade in Germany, where he deployed to Iraq in 2003 and again in 2005. In 2006, General Gronewold joined the Oregon Army National Guard and began serving with the 2nd Battalion, 641st Aviation Regiment. He deployed to Iraq a third time in 2008-2009. He then served as the commander of 2641 Aviation from 2014 to 2016. After he graduated from the War College in 2018, he served as the commander of the 41st Infantry Brigade Combat Team from 2019 to 2020 before he assumed command of the 40th Combat Aviation Brigade and deployed to the CENTCOM area of responsibility in support of Operations Inherent Resolve and Spartan Shield in 21-22. Upon return, he served as the commander and chief of staff of the Oregon Army National Guard Land Component Command before being named Adjutant General in late 2023. Our co-host today is Major Promotable Heather Basher, congratulations, from the Oregon Air National Guard's 142nd Force Support Squadron. She has served in the Air Force and the Oregon Air National Guard in multiple capacities as an Arabic linguist and a public affairs officer. She served as a drill status guardsman, or DSG to use the air lingo, or a traditional part-time guardsman for the past 14 years, while pursuing her civilian career in education as a high school math teacher, activities director, and an assistant principal. She recently returned from a deployment to the Middle East and assumed command of the 142nd FSS with the 142nd Wing at Portland Air National Guard Base. And our producer, again, is First Sergeant Zach Holden, a public affairs specialist for the Oregon Guard and the 115th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment. Sir, thanks so much for joining us today on Hope in the Trenches.
Thanks for having me.
Sir, now, I got this from retired Sergeant Major of the Army, Grinston. He said, if I asked you where you're from, that's just like a quick 2-word answer. So, sir, how'd you grow up?
So I grew up on a small farm in Minnesota, western Minnesota. We raised dairy cows and different crops, and it was a good way to grow up.
Yeah, I grew up in farm country as well, too. Well, and so, sir, then how did you go from Minnesota to the Army, or what sparked your interest in serving in the military?
Yeah, so I'm a product of the 1986 version of Top Gun. And so after watching that movie, I really wanted to be an F-14 pilot, like probably every other kid did, and applied to the Naval Academy and was not successful. And luckily my high school guidance counselor was like, well, if you're going to apply to one academy, you should probably apply to all three. Wow. And West Point accepted me where the other two didn't, so that's how I ended up in the Army.
Do you know what you were getting into with West Point? Did you do a lot of research? I mean, it was tougher then.
I did some research, and I got to go visit once before I accepted the appointment. So, yeah, I think I knew pretty much what I was getting into.
And the intent was to become a pilot? Or had you thought about flying before, or
yeah, after watching Top Gun, I'd wanted to fly, of course, right? But when I went to West Point, that kind of went out the window because you don't think of the Army and flying together normally. So I for the first couple of years, I thought I'd be an artillery officer, something like that. And then turns out I picked an easy enough major that I got decent enough grades to be at that part of my class that could actually get into aviation branch. So I selected aviation branch as a senior and was lucky enough to go to U.S. Army Flight School.
Oh, very good. Now, I knew that they had helicopters in the Army, and I wanted to fly helicopters, but I didn't have the eyesight, and that was before corrective surgery, so that was off the table for me right away. Now, I've had a lot of friends from West Point over the years, and I know that at West Point, every cadet has to participate either in a varsity sport or an intramural sport. So what was your sport?
Yeah, well, I wasn't talented enough to participate in any varsity sports, so I played intramurals, and you can play the same intramural sport twice.
Okay.
So over the course of and there's 2 seasons a year, so over the course of 4 years, you end up playing a lot. So I played football, rugby, team handball, area hockey, game, just kind of an invented game that's called flicker ball. I don't think it's played anywhere outside of West Point.
Well, we played it in the Army.
Oh, okay.
Well, at least in ROTC too.
Right.
In Minnesota, we played flicker ball.
Oh, okay.
So, or ultimate football is, I think, what they call it too.
Yeah, flicker balls. Yeah, so I played a wide variety of intramural sports there.
Did you also play sports in high school?
I did wrestling and played football in high
Okay,
school.
so
Okay. Yeah.
you were comfortable with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wrestling. Yeah, that was an intramural that I did also. So, yeah.
And I'm probably the other Minnesotan that didn't grow up playing hockey.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Didn't actually play.
There's more of us out there than most people think.
Right. Yeah. It was expensive. It was
Yes.
very expensive.
Yeah.
So from all of your experiences growing up or even going to West Point and even until this point, what is something else you just want to share about who you are?
I don't know. That's a tough question. I don't think there's anything interesting enough to share. But growing up on the farm was a lot of hard work. Like we did a lot of chores and had a lot of animals that you had to tend to every Saturday, Sunday. It didn't matter what day of the week it was. So that really taught me a lot about work ethic, I think. Like, and maybe detrimental. Like work comes first all the time,
Yes.
right? And I don't really have hobbies. I think of all my hobbies as work. Like golf,
Yes.
or even I can turn fishing into work if I try hard
You
enough.
must do it well.
Yeah.
Yes. Excellence in all you do.
Well, I heard a quote once that everybody should have 3 hobbies, and I've kind of amended it, but everyone should have first a hobby that pays the bills, so something that provides an income, a hobby that gives you a creative outlet, and a hobby that keeps you in shape.
Okay.
Of course, then,
Interesting.
so, as I'm a chaplain, so I had a 4th hobby I think everybody should have, then probably some spiritual discipline that helps keep them grounded or centered and focused on the right things. But so I can relate to that too, because when your work is fulfilling, then it doesn't always feel like work.
Right.
Yeah, but now I've heard it said too. Growing up on the farm, was it an easy transition to West Point? Because I've heard some people say then joining the military they got to sleep in a little bit.
Some aspects were not difficult at all. Some aspects were really different. I mean, it was a culture shock for sure. Growing up in a little town, or on a little farm, going to school in a little town, and then all of a sudden being dumped in with, a couple thousand cadets from all over the country.
Right.
I got to meet a lot of interesting people that I hadn't been exposed to before going there. So yeah, it was interesting for sure. It was a culture shock.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Same here. My first exposure then to the active Army at 19 was really eye-opening.
Yeah, I experienced the same thing too. I grew up in a small town as well, but in Northern California, but going to active duty was really a great experience, and just being a little fish in a big pond instead of the opposite.
Oh
Yes.
yeah. Which
Yes.
is great. Which is great. Well, and sir, at some point you found out about the Oregon Guard, ended up moving to Oregon. How did that take place?
Yeah, so I was deployed. So I was stationed in Germany, and the battalion that I was in Germany was deployed to Afghanistan, and our brigade was split between Kandahar and Bagram, and so we needed an extra Chinook company to fill out the entire brigade. So the Chinook company was the Oregon and Nevada National Guard, and that's where I got to learn a little bit about the National Guard, or a lot actually, and met some Oregonians, and they encouraged me to apply for this full-time job in Pendleton, Oregon, which I didn't know that you could do such a thing. And so I learned a little bit about it. And I was at the 10-year mark in my Army career, and it seemed like a good good point to make a career change.
Make a transition.
So, yeah, and I was very blessed and lucky to be accepted, or to be accepted into the Oregon Guard. So yeah, haven't looked back since. That was 17 years ago.
Oh yeah, and I moved to Oregon just a little bit behind you, but that was a little bit of a shift, definitely going from active duty to I started off in the reserves before moving to Oregon and joining the Oregon Guard. But I had a similar experience. I remember back before the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was some disparaging remarks made about the Guard or the reserve components. But then on my first deployment to Iraq in 2003, we had it's very similar. We had round out companies from the reserves and the National Guard, and learned very quickly that we could stack those soldiers up against any of our active duty soldiers.
Yeah. Yeah, the experience level of the pilots in the Guard unit far surpassed that of those in our active duty unit too. So yeah, I mean, we had Vietnam era pilots still flying in the Guard. So yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that particularly about aviation. That they get a lot of time flying. So now, reflecting, sir, you've been in uniform almost 28 years. What's something that you might tell Cadet Gronewold if you could go back and share some lessons learned from your military career?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, so first of all, I didn't ever intend to stay in the Army beyond 5 years. Like, I was going to go to the academy, be in the Army for 5 years, and then go do something else with my life. And somewhere along the way, in those first 5 years, like, hey, when this stops being fun, I'll find something else to do. So 28 years later, still here, still having fun, still enjoying it. I don't know if there's anything I'd go back and tell Cadet Gronewold today, but fall back on the things you learned at the academy, right? Some of the basic building blocks that I learned there, I've leaned on heavily throughout my career. Just some of the silly things that we had to memorize. The first summer I was there, we had to learn them for a reason, and they're, quotes from different generals or different wars that still apply today. Leadership lessons, discipline lessons, et cetera. So, yeah, got a pretty firm foundation there, I think.
That's awesome.
We do that a lot in the church too. We have young people memorize things, right? And the way I've heard that described is you learn it up here first, and then as you grow and mature, then it moves
to your heart,
moves here, right? Yeah, and then the deeper meaning of that stuff becomes more evident.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I know too the reasons that people join the military are often not the reasons that people stay in, right?
Mm-hmm. I did the same thing. I joined thinking I was just going to do 6 years and be done, and here I am. So
yeah.
I agree. So now you have been the Adjutant General for 6 months now. What is something that you have learned over these last 6 months that you didn't know or realize before?
Yeah, well, I've learned a lot about the air component, that's for sure, and I'm still learning a lot more, so that's been very interesting and eye-opening for me. I've learned that the two services, the Army and the Air, can look at the same problem or the same challenge and approach it from completely different directions, or take, create policies that are 180 degrees different, so that's been an interesting challenge for me. Particularly, and then the whole state side of the business that I hadn't ever really been exposed to before. Working with the governor's office, with our state legislators, how the state budget and state funding works. Our legislative proposals. I didn't really even know that the Guard made legislative proposals before this year, so that's been very eye-opening and a very steep learning curve.
Yes, wow. I remember when I came to headquarters and started as a public affairs officer here, and the whole state side was eye-opening to me. Domestic operations, responding to forest fires, but really neat part of what we do as the Guard to serve our state, and the whole region really. You did mention the air component being something new. Obviously, the Army is always something I am learning as well, and I've had opportunities to work with soldiers and have had great relationships. But I know it can be challenging just understanding each other's cultures. Like as you've been the Adjutant General so far, what do you have any ideas or thoughts about how we fit together, the Air and Army side?
Yeah, so the Army and the Air components have vastly different missions. The air, even the two wings have vastly different missions,
Yes.
you know, from each other. So that's been pretty interesting. And everyone has their mission. I wouldn't try to force jointness into our organization where it doesn't belong.
Yes.
There's some areas where we need to work. The two components need to work together jointly, mostly domestic operations, and I think we do a pretty good job of that. There's little tweaks and improvements that can always be made, but I think the level of jointness that we have right now is about right, and I would encourage us to continue that, but I wouldn't try to force an added level of jointness if it's not necessary.
Great. Yes.
I
Makes sense.
know I've heard General Hokanson and others say this too, but because you mentioned the different combat roles that the Army and Air components play, but being good at our combat missions really is what equips us to be able to respond to any emergency or any situation in the state. Because I had no idea what happened above the brigade level before I came to Joint Force Headquarters, and then to see such a large civilian workforce that supports every soldier and airman that we put boots on the ground somewhere, and then to watch both the Army and the Air come together for domestic operations, whether that was the vaccine sites or supporting wildfire operations. It really does bring us together, and probably that cognitive diversity too, looking at problems in different ways can enrich
Strength.
the organization too.
No, absolutely. Yeah, the two components can learn a lot from each other, I think, just because they approach the same problem so differently. There's a lot of crossover that can be learned at at this level, the state level, and probably the brigade and wing level too. Below that, it's probably less emphatic, but at the higher levels, I think we can learn from how the others do process and improve. Each component can improve based on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, sir, something that I've heard is a topic that you like to address, maybe particularly with junior leaders and in mentorship settings, is this idea of servant leadership. And that's been said too. The organization doesn't exist for the sake of the leader, right? And a leader there is no leadership without the people with whom we serve. So what does the idea of servant leadership mean to you, and how is that part of your personal leadership philosophy?
Yeah. So it basically means putting the needs of your soldiers and airmen ahead of your own as a leader at any level. Because our soldiers and airmen are the ones who actually do the mission, right? Once you're above E5, E6, you kind of turn into a leadership role more than an execution or an executor role. And so from that level up, pretty much everyone's a leader. And so we all serve the echelon below us to help them be successful, with the ultimate goal of making our soldiers and airmen who actually accomplish the mission successful. And so putting their needs ahead of our own is really what that's all about. If you think of the analogy of a squad, everyone's a squad leader, right? I've got a squad. It's General Pardee and General Riley, General Unruh, the Sergeant Major, the Command Chief, Captain Goodard and Sergeant Rutherford. That's my squad. So I have to make sure that I take care of them and make sure their basic needs are met and that they're successful at their jobs, that they have the resources they need. And then as we manifest that through the chain of command, as long as that trickles down to the soldier and airman level, then we're doing our job.
Mm-hmm. And I think that becomes readily apparent at every echelon when a person in a position of authority does not have the interests of their people at heart.
Yeah.
Was there someone or in particular or that taught you about servant leadership or maybe modeled that for you?
Well, we've all had good role models and probably some not so good role models through our career, right? That we've taken bits and pieces from. I don't remember when I first heard the term servant leadership, probably around 2003, 2004. And and so we kind of grew up in the mission first, and when I was a lieutenant, it was just mission first, right? And we didn't really talk about taking care of people at all. But I thought, well, how am I going to be successful at accomplishing the mission as a lieutenant platoon leader, right? Well, I have to take care of these soldiers that actually fix the helicopters and fly the helicopters and do the mission. And if I take care of them, I'm pretty sure they'll always get the mission done, right? They will always accomplish the mission. And, as I grew as a leader, company command in 2003, 2004, that idea of being a servant leader kind of started to matriculate through the Army, and then it was mission first, people always. So we started to focus on taking care of people in the Army side at least. And but it really wasn't until General McConville became the Chief of Staff that we said, no, we're going to put people first.
Right.
And so, the term servant leadership, I didn't actually look up the doctrine until just a few years ago. Like, what is servant leadership really? And, it was, I don't know if it's a religious foundation, but, Robert Greenleaf kind of started the movement or the study in the 70s. And I looked at his doctrine a little bit. Not all of it applies to us as military leaders, but a lot of it does. And so I take the bits and pieces of that that I think apply.
I was going to ask if you'd heard the name Greenleaf. I think he did have maybe a little background in theology, but not explicitly religious
Right.
In the approach.
Yeah. The Greenleaf Foundation, you can just Google it and find out a lot about servant leadership from that.
Yeah, and some great speakers too.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation just the other day with a leader, and we were reflecting on what we didn't know when we were younger, and what we thought leadership looked like, and how it wasn't always about putting people first. But we did too. We talked about resiliency, and that's something I know, at least as I recall, we've been talking about resiliency in the military for more than 15 years now, almost 20 years really, starting with early in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there's a lot of different components that make someone resilient, and it looks different for everybody. Sir, what do you do to stay whole and healthy or resilient? Because I'm sure now as the Adjutant General, there are tremendous demands on your time, and you've got to be ready for anything whenever the phone rings. So what does resiliency look like for you, or what do you do to stay holistically healthy and fit?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And ironically enough, I got to meet all the other 53 tags actually on my first day on the job on November 1st. And the Missouri tag came up to me, and he, congratulated me or whatever, slapped me on the shoulder, and he said, make sure you have a good workout plan. That was his piece of advice, and I thought that was interesting because most of the tags are older, right? Quite a bit older than me and older folks. And so I took that to heart, but luckily I had joined a CrossFit gym just a little over a year ago, and that really kind of changed the way I think about fitness, and it's made it much more enjoyable for me. I'm not advocating for CrossFit in particular, but for me it was a good fit. And so, but in this job I've gone from being an afternoon worker-outer to a morning worker-outer because I just need a little bit more time, and so I try to get my workout done while my family's still asleep, so I'm not missing out on as much family time, or not missing out on any family time. So I've had to change, my daily schedule a little bit, but hasn't really been too much. But how do we maintain resiliency? I found out in this job you got to take a little time to yourself, time to contemplate, because the pace is pretty rigorous, and so you got to just take time to step back and take a little mental break once in a while too. So that's a big part of resiliency, and just spending time, with my family and unplugging from work, like completely unplugging, has helped a lot.
So is that do you use the word solitude or reflection? Do you intentionally schedule that?
No, no, but solitude is a good is something that I would relate to. And just the drive home, the drive to and from work is just a little bit of solitude time. I can just turn on some music and rock out and prepare for the day, or
issues or problems percolate a little bit.
Yeah, or let the day go away. Yeah.
All right, sir. I just have to ask, why do you like CrossFit?
The thing I like about it the most is I can just show up and someone tells me what the workout is, and then we go through the workout. If I don't know what one of the exercises is, there's a coach there that helps coach me, and it's an hour of the day where I don't have to think about what I'm doing next,
Yes.
right? Like someone's already laid it out for me, and I'm pretty confident that it's giving my body a good workout too. So like I feel like I've accomplished something when I leave CrossFit, or working out on my own isn't always that effective, and sometimes I don't feel like I really worked out. So that's what I like about it.
That is great. It's a great reason.
Yeah.
Yes. So we've been talking about resiliency, like our personal resiliency. So how do you see just building that same resiliency with the whole force?
Yeah. So physical training and our military training are two ways, that we build that resiliency in our force, I think. And then we need to talk about and encourage our soldiers and airmen, to work on the spiritual, emotional, social aspects of their own resiliency, because there are events we do, I guess, to build social resiliency as well. And, every unit has their own unique way of doing that, whether it's a unit barbecue or family readiness events, whatever those are. So, institutionally, we can do a lot to help our soldiers and airmen with resiliency, but, we get together 24 days, 24 plus 15, 39 days a year in some cases. So every individual member of the Guard needs to do something to build or work on their own resiliency, and really just think about it, right? Like take a look in the mirror and go, was my emotional response to this challenge, whether it was at work or at drill, was it appropriate at the time? Maybe I can do something better to self-regulate. We're all probably Gen Xers sitting here, and some of the coping mechanisms we were taught as kids probably
aren't great.
Not great,
best,
right?
yes.
Don't serve us real well.
Right.
And so the younger generations don't understand that either, because they were raised a little bit differently, probably in a lot of cases, with regard to examining feelings and thinking about the emotional aspect of life, which we were kind of just trained, I think, to push down or to ignore.
Yes, absolutely.
Growing up as kids. So we got to take those generational differences into account when we talk about resiliency, because every generation now, we've got probably 3 or 4 generations, historical generations.
Of serving currently.
Yeah, and everyone had a little different upbringing based on the social times, and everyone deals with the aspect of emotional, social, spiritual resiliency a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note too, what do you see so when looking at our current airmen, soldiers serving in the Oregon National Guard, what do you see as their strengths, maybe just the majority or maybe the younger serving generation, or generations, and then what are the areas of weaknesses, and then maybe how do we play on our strengths and build on our weaknesses?
Yeah, so I don't purport to be any sort of expert on generational differences or what drives and motivates young people today. And there's tons of ideas out there in the social sphere. So without getting too deep into that, I think every generation has its members that want to serve, right? That want to serve their country, want to serve their state. Serve their nation, and I think those are the people that are naturally attracted to joining the National Guard, whether it's the air component or the Army component. So I think that's one thing that we all have in common. I think the younger generation today, they really thrive on self-fulfillment, where maybe Gen Xers like us were a little bit more driven by external factors, right? Like, hey, join the Guard, pay for college. That was a big thing when we were growing up. Today's generation, I think, they want to do it for its service, for its own value, for its intrinsic value, which I think is great. At the same time, in this will sound like a complete contradiction, I guess, now that I say it out loud. Is the younger generation more entitled or self-motivated just on themselves and have a less sense of teamwork? I'm not sure. I don't think necessarily that the folks who join the Guard are that way, but that might be one trend, of our younger generation. So just, I think really every individual is different. And so as leaders, as long as we stay connected to each person in our squad and understand what drives and motivates them, that can help us adjust our leadership style to meet their needs.
Yes. And certainly we know as we grow in age, we become more, I think, less selfish, or we understand, we learn as leaders and grow and understand taking care of people is really important. So I think naturally as you age, you also mature. So that's awesome. So I have a follow-on question from that. I know that we all have families. We have work. We have drill weekend. There's a lot going on in all of our lives, and on top of that, we're striving for excellence. So, just do you have any words of wisdom for all of us who are serving on just balancing family life, balancing all the things we want to do, and maintain excellence, and knowing that we are also humans? So.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge, right? It's like a three-legged stool or maybe four-legged, depending on how you look at it. But your family is one leg, your civilian life or your civilian career is a leg, and what you do in the National Guard, your service to the state, is also a leg. And if those three are out of balance, the chair becomes unstable. And so the key is trying to balance those, and it's challenging, right? And so I bring this up a lot, but whenever you hear an ultra-successful person being interviewed on TV or the radio, they're an expert in their field at whatever their field is. The interviewer inevitably asks, so how did you become the leading expert or the top in your field? And the person will always respond with something like, I set a goal, or I set goals, and I stopped doing everything that didn't get me closer to that goal. And so I think we need to do that for each of the three legs on our stool, right? Like what's our goal for each of those three, and then you just have to decide what makes the cut line and what doesn't. And you just have to, you can't be excellent at everything. You have to decide what areas you want to be excellent in and what areas you're willing to accept mediocrity or just not do, period.
So it sounds like a very deliberate, being more deliberate and directive or self-directed in your life is going to help you to be more successful all around.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we touched on that a little bit earlier too when we talking about hobbies, right? And I've had these conversations with young soldiers and service members too, that you've got to use your time in ways that help you reach your goals, even if it's your leisure time or your recreational time, and the time you spend with friends and other people. You should be spending your time and surrounding yourself with people that are going to help make you better, right? Because there's that old adage too, that you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, right? And so choose carefully too, and then there's also an encouragement in there too to be the type of person that is making the people around you better. Better also.
Good.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I wanted to circle back to the bulk of your career that was spent as an aviator, because I think there's a little bit of, for people who don't fly, there's a little bit of mystique to flying an aircraft, whether that's a helicopter or a plane. You've flown in combat and commanded an aviation brigade in a combat zone. What kind of life lessons did flying teach you?
Yeah, how to evaluate risk.
Interesting.
And like risk versus reward, right? Like how important is this mission in this treacherous weather condition or challenging environmental condition, and is the risk worth the goal of the mission, right? And so back here in Oregon at home on a training mission, that's usually pretty easy to figure out. That calculus becomes much more difficult in combat where like we always complete the mission, right? And that's where our level of training really comes into play, and our level of risk management and mitigation it's really a science, but it's it's an art and a science, and you have to be able to balance the two to do it effectively. So, yeah, risk management and risk mitigation is something, and, getting in a helicopter after a few years, it kind of dawned on me, like, anytime you're up in the air, you're about 30 seconds from being in the ground, right? So think about that. I try to think about that every time I take off. I was getting in to do a flight with a young pilot one day, and the weather wasn't the greatest, but it was legal. We could go do the mission, and so we talked about it a little bit, and he said, "Hey, sir, I'm not scared." And I said, "Well, I'm a little bit scared every time I strap into this thing, because we're 30 seconds from hitting the ground at any given time." And so, hopefully that sunk in for him, but that was something that I tried to kind of keep in the back of my mind is, life is short. And it's shorter when you're in the air, potentially, so.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great lesson, and you balance that too, right? You don't want to be overly risk averse, especially when when there's a mission that has to be accomplished, and other people depend on you.
Yeah, if we're completely risk averse in training, then when it comes time to do a mission in combat, we're going to be less successful. So you've got to incrementally and through a deliberate process push beyond those comfort levels a little bit, just to that's how we get better, not just at flying, but at everything in life. You got to get outside your comfort level a little bit once in a while without putting yourself at too much risk.
Sure. Well, and does that old adage hold true that you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your lowest level of preparation and planning?
Yeah, you rise to the level of your training.
Yeah. So, sir, we face a lot of challenges in society and in the military too, and the reason the military exists is because the world is not always a happy and peaceful place. Now, the overarching theme for our show is living and leading with hope. Hope can be talked about in religious contexts in one way, and there are other ways, maybe more pragmatic ways to talk about hope and leadership too. And there are studies that have shown that successful organizations and successful leaders rate high on that character trait. What gives you hope, sir, and what gives you? And I like to not just talk about blind optimism, right, or wishful thinking, but what helps you believe that a better tomorrow is possible, even on Oregon's worst day, or like they say in the Jock too, Oregon's most likely bad day? What gives you hope?
Yeah, interesting. So let's talk about the word hope a little bit first.
Yes, sir.
Hope was kind of beaten out of my lexicon as a young officer. Like, hope's not a method, right?
Right.
We hear that a lot, especially in briefings. Like,
or a COA.
We hope we accomplish the objective, right? So I've kind of erased that word from my vocabulary altogether. But I think the way you're using it, I would equate it to faith. Right? Like, I have faith in our units. I have faith in our people. And, on Oregon's worst day, what does that look like? Cascadia, probably, or maybe some sort of cyber attack that takes down the power grid or the water grid or something. I have faith, or I am confident that our guardsmen and women will respond and rise to the level of their training and be a responsive force for the citizens of the state of Oregon.
I think that's a special part of serving in the Guard, especially. It's almost like a purpose in our life, right? It gives me, the hope is that I'm serving a purpose. When bad day happens, that you're trained, you know how to respond, even though there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of, obviously, negative things going on, that you can serve and you can help and you can make a difference. And I think that really is powerful and awesome to be a part of. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And it inspires people. And there are two examples that I've used over the last few years, and I've used them on the podcast before too. But when the Oregon Guard, we were serving in Kosovo in 2020, and people had told me how much the people of Kosovo love the U.S. military. And it was absolutely true. Wherever we went, when people saw us in uniform and they saw the American flag, they would come up and just express how thankful they were for what we had done almost then, more than 20 years earlier. And then when I got back from Kosovo, I saw something very similar here in Oregon when we had our Oregon Guard soldiers and airmen serving in the vaccination sites, and people who had been struggling to deal with the pandemic then came out and they saw our men and women in uniform. That gave them a little glimpse of hope too, right? That we're going to get through this. We can. There are people that care about us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sir. Another question that I always like to ask is, well, we use the expression "leaders are readers," and I know, and maybe it's a generational thing too. I get into fun conversations about whether audiobooks count as reading a book, and I will say publicly that yes, I feel if you listen to an audiobook, it counts. You can say you read the book, but there are other forms of media too, whether that's podcasts or things like that. Anything that, sir, that you've read or listened to recently that have been maybe especially meaningful or inspirational or gave you something to make you better?
Yeah, so a book I'd recommend for our company grade leaders is Extreme Ownership, Jocko's book. Okay. That's pretty good, right? It really, it kind of really articulates like that servant leadership, or how leaders, like, hey, when you're a leader, you're responsible for whatever happens on your team or in your squad, whatever that is. But not to take credit for the success, but really, leadership is about the responsibility of, leading the team and then letting the team take the credit for success and the leader taking the responsibility for failure. And I think Jocko's book does a really good job of that. Another one I enjoyed was Mattis's book, Call Sign Chaos.
Yes, sir.
And just, that guy's ability to articulate commander's intent, like he was so good at that. And that's something that I aspire to, is to be just 10% as good at that as Mattis was. Just a brilliant guy, right? The book I'm reading right now, I haven't quite finished it yet because it's really long. It's called Team of Rivals, and it's about Abraham Lincoln and how he appointed his the rivals in the primary to his cabinet, and gave them all primary positions on his cabinet, and how he was underestimated kind of by everyone, just kind of being the uneducated country lawyer. He didn't have a fancy degree from back east like the rest, and just kind of how he led that team and used each person's strength or connections to accomplish his political goals is pretty interesting. So, and it's a good historical reference too. I learned a lot about history that we didn't learn in school, right? It's an extremely well-researched book. So if you have a lot of time on your hands or you want to read a long book, Civil War era, Team of Rivals is really good.
Well, that fits, I think, with something that I've heard you talk about quite a bit with mission command, and that going back to the Jocko book, he talks about decentralized command too, right? And so sometimes even as the leader, you're ultimately responsible, but sometimes it can be incredibly beneficial for the organization for the leader just to take a moment and just say, well, what do you think? How do you think we can approach this problem or this mission?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to empower leaders at every level, and that, I don't just mean levels of command, but leaders at the squad, the platoon, and their air equivalents, right? To make decisions and to be responsible for the success of their unit, and not to always look up for a solution when the solution is best found at that echelon, right? And so I often say to people, and I'll say it more often, like, if you're looking to me to make a decision to fix your problem, it's going to apply to the entire organization, and it's probably not going to give you the outcome you want. So let's fix problems at the appropriate level. And I understand there are some things that only I can fix as TAG, but boy, don't look for a state level or a tag level solution to every problem, because you won't like the outcome, and it won't make the organization better, right? So we've got to address and fix problems at the appropriate echelon.
Yeah, and I think that's too, that fits with how I like to use hope in the military context, that as a leader you create a vision for the organization and kind of paint the picture of what the future could look like, and then you empower the people around you to do what it takes to achieve that vision. And in positive psychology circles, when they talk about hope as a character trait, those are a couple of the key components. You've got to have a goal. You've got to understand that you have agency and are able to actually do something about the problem at hand, and then you give people a pathway, or you understand that there's a way to get there. Sir, and I've had to tweak, we talked about this before too. I was calling them TAG's top 3, but if you look at the posters, they all say our top 3, right? And you've done that for our organization too. And our top 3 are being connected. We've talked a little bit about that, to competent in what we do and what our state and our nation need us to do, and committed. Any final thoughts, sir, on our top 3 and serving in being connected, competent, and committed?
Yeah, so that's a lot to dig into. And yeah, they're not my top 3, right? Like, I'm leading the 3, but I expect every leader at every echelon to not memorize but internalize those top 3 and to talk about them and to exemplify them and to do the top 3. Because if every person, those top 3 is something that everyone can do, right? Not just leaders. It's not restricted to company commanders or wing commanders. Every single person in our organization can be connected to those around them, you know, whether that's the people in their squad or in their team, or whatever organization they're in. And why are we here, right? To be competent, to strive for excellence, like you said, and then just be committed to improving the organization and to improving each other.
Those all build on resilience, right? Those all build resilience through having all those.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, absolutely. Because, the end state is that we're trained and ready to fight and win, whether that means, in a combat zone somewhere or on a state partnership mission, right? We're trained to fight. We'll use the word fight a little bit differently, but trained to help our state partners be successful and help them win, or to fight a fire and to win, to save someone's property or someone's life. Trained to fight and win. That being an Oregon Guard member is fulfilling and a source of pride, right? Like, everyone wants to be on a winning team. Nobody cheers for not very many people cheer for the Minnesota Vikings, right? Like, everybody wants to be on a winning team. And, that we're committed to our soldiers, our airmen, and to each other, and to the organization. And that at the end of the day, Oregonians look to us and say, if I were to join the military, I would want to join the Oregon Guard. Like, that's my service of choice because of what they represent in the state.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Well, sir, we want to be respectful of your time. Thanks so much for the time you've shared with us today. Is there any parting thoughts or anything else that you'd like to share?
I think we've covered it all.
That was a good. No, and that was a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, no,
Any
thank you
other
so much.
questions?
It's been a pleasure to be here with both of you, and an honor, so thank you.
Likewise, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, sir, God bless you and your family and the work that you do for our state and our nation.
Thanks, Chaplain. Likewise.
Thank you.
This podcast is produced by the Oregon National Guard Public Affairs Office. My prayer for you is that wherever you find yourself, that you might find hope for today and strength for the ambiguity and chaos of life. Blessings on the rest of your day.